one should know that Kramer, after the war, was for 3 years in the United States working in physiology, and returned first to the chair of physiology to Marburg, and then took over the Department of Physiology in Göttingen. And he brought a very international flair to Göttingen. And one occasion I remember very well, when he was organizing, and I think that was one of the very first symposia after the war in physiology in Germany, that he arranged a symposium which brought together scientists like Heinrich Wurz, like Karl Gottschalk, like John Pappenheimer. And it was one of these great events specifically for young people and young fellows in the department to be exposed to these giants in the science. And I think that was one of the greatest things. Kramer always tried to expose the younger scientists to the experts and really great scientists internationally wise.
And John Boylan, right?
And John Boylan is a very special case. I mean, John Boylan came to Kramer on a sabbatical into Göttingen, and became a very, very close friend of Kurt Kramer, and also to me, which lasted for whole his life. And John Boylan was the ideal counterpart to Kurt Kramer, because he was so much interested in literature and music too, so that Kramer could really enjoy talks and discussion and evenings with John Boylan. And it was for us one of the greatest things to be among these two people and learn and experience their competence.
It is often said that the part of the attraction of the Göttingen Institute was its social life, and that the soul of it was Kurt Kramer. Were there special events where Kramer pulled the institute together in non-scientific context?
Oh, definitely. I mean, one of the greatest things which he was so proud of was at the Carnival, Faschingstime, to have all members of the department, the students, and the students from outside of the department to join for one of the greatest festival and feasts. We changed the department into a club, and it was absolutely fascinating to see Kramer among this group of youngsters and enjoying social interaction with everybody. He also was extremely effective in helping people in the department, so he really looked after the individuals very carefully and gave his help whenever it was needed.
So let's turn to your career as a physiologist. I had the impression that career progressed extremely rapidly. You started in about 59, 58, 59. When I came to your lab in 63, you were already a made man, as some would say. So why do you think you were so successful so fast?
Well, I think one attractive aspect was that we had been working on a forefront topic in physiology in general, and that was the analysis of renal hemodynamics and the intrarenal distribution of renal circulation. Not much was known at that time about these different areas in the kidney, how they are perfused with blood, and what the function of the blood flow in these different areas is. And second, I think in '59 I went to the United States, to Washington, and worked in Walter Reed Army Institute of Research for 2 years. And at that time I was exposed to many colleagues in the United States with whom I established friendship and scientific interaction. And I think these two things, working in an attractive field of physiology and having international experience, helped very much in my own career in Germany, and there was no question that at that time also there was an enormous need in Germany for scientists, so the positions became available and helped very much to develop own research and own research groups. I think these are the major factors in promoting my own career.
You obviously were interested in maintaining and seeking international connections. Why was that so important to you?
I think science in general is an international affair, and regional science as it was experienced in former times in countries which were not open to the world were a very bad example for science, how to develop science and how to promote science. So the international aspect in science was from the beginning on one of I was extremely interested in, and specifically to be exposed and also to become friends with very important scientists. At that time, I just should mention a few names with whom I became very close. It was Don Selding, Gerhard Giebisch, Floyd Rector, Selkort, Karl Gottschalk, Würz, de Wardener. I mean, and that exposure to these excellent scientists immediately helped your own science very much, because you measured your own science on science of those very successful and productive scientists. So internationality of science was for my whole life one of major driving force in my own career and my own activities.
It's my impression that the knowledge about the kidney function, both basic science as well as clinically, developed extremely rapidly in the 50s and early 60s. Why do you think that happened at that time? Was it a coincidence between method availability and the right people, or why do you think so much was done in that time period?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the availability of new techniques beyond clearance techniques that's in the time of Homer Smith pushed enormously the analysis of intrarenal functional details, not to speak of the micropuncture technique, which was the most used technique in those days to analyze intrarenal functional pattern in the different segments of the nephron, the interaction, the control of reabsorption, the control of circulation. So I think, as quite often in the biological science field, it's a methodology which pushes and opens up a new insight into systems. No question that this technique had been picked up by many extremely competent laboratories in the United States, in France, in Japan, in Germany, in Sweden, which in general pushed this field of renal physiology very much and brought it to an international, highly recognized scientific field.
Even though obviously scientific developments are closely connected, where it happened, mainly in the United States and in Europe, and yet sometimes one thinks and wonders if there's a difference in the way science is done in these two regions of the world.
I don't think that today there is much conceptual or difference in renal physiology, renal kidney science between these two countries. But after the war, of course, there was an enormous gap. And what was the reason for that gap? I think the United States were fortunate in so far as during the war, Second World War, science could still develop and scientific activities were supported, and young scientists could develop on the shoulder of experienced and highly competent scientists. Whereas in Europe in general, and particularly in Germany, we had a lack of experienced scientists. Some of them left the country for different reasons, others have died, and there was a kind of vacuum in Germany, and it took quite a number of years to re-establish this background of science, and that is the development of scientists over the years, again to give the help and push and exercise younger scientists to further develop this area. So it was a time when many of us went to the United States because the availability of experienced scientists was much larger than in Germany at that time.
And was it perhaps also the political will to spend the taxpayers' money on science issues as evidenced by the establishment of the NIH in the United States as this mega funding agency?
Funding of biological and medical science in Germany primarily comes from the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. And the Forschungsgemeinschaft in those days was, I think, able to support good science in Germany. And there was no real shortage of money at that time. But over the years, the situation has changed, and particularly in the years of today, we have a shortage of money because the limitations of the federal budget also limits the support of the Forschungsgemeinschaft. The university budget had been cut down during the last 2 years by 5 to 10%, all signs of shortage of support to from the public. So we are presently experiencing a time of shortage of money for research, which was completely different in the 60s and 70s.
Is there hard evidence that science progression is retarded by the lack of appropriate funding, like as measured, for example, in the number of submitted manuscripts or whatever evidence one can
Well,
gather?
that's a very difficult question, but I think for young scientists, it is less attractive in these days of shortage to join research groups and to plan for lifelong work in science. It's no question, and I think similar situation exists in the United States, that, for example, medical students hardly come to the departments of basic science anymore because they try to make their living outside of science for very obvious reasons.
Let's turn to your scientific contributions a little.